The hush in the old Lowe's Angels movie palace felt both eerie and electric, like a set piece frozen in time. Marble columns soared toward a gilded ceiling that reflected the warm glow from a massive chandelier. Rows of plush red seats fanned out across the auditorium, and thick velvet curtains hugged the edges of a majestic stage. A faint hum echoed from somewhere near the projection booth, an odd undercurrent of tension that made even the slightest shuffle of feet sound like a thunderclap. In the lobby, movie posters promised star-studded experiences, yet none captured the strangeness unfolding inside these walls tonight. At the center of the disturbance stood an elderly patron named Wanda Reynolds, wearing a hearing aid. She gripped her ticket stub as if it were a lifeline. The usher loomed before her, eyes narrowed and voice tinged with impatience, telling her that she needed to leave. Wanda's face etched into a worried scowl. She was certain she had done nothing wrong. Behind them, at the far side of the auditorium, a cluster of cameras glittered under the bright lights set up for a live shoot, capturing every detail for a major Hollywood production starring Chris Hemsworth. Neither Wanda nor the dismissive usher realized, in that precarious moment, that their clash would ripple far beyond the red seats and the silent watchers in the dark. Nearly an hour before showtime, Wanda had entered the historic Olympia Theater with a reserved excitement. She had driven from her small suburban neighborhood just north of Lowe's Angels to attend a special screening of a classic musical that was among her favorites. For Wanda, film and theater were forms of refuge. Hearing had always been a challenge. She was born partially deaf. Over decades, technology had helped keep her connected to the world, but she remained a bit self-conscious, especially in crowds. Still, she wanted to see this film on the big screen, in all its revived glory. Shortly after she arrived, she noted the unusual sight of a film crew bustling through the lobby. Lighting rigs and cameras were stationed in corners, cables snaking under the plush carpeting. Actors and production assistants whisked by, speaking in hushed, urgent voices. Word had spread that Chris Hemsworth himself was here to shoot a promotional clip for an upcoming blockbuster. The staff had cordoned off a part of the lobby, restricting general patrons from accessing certain wings. Despite the mild chaos, Wanda's ticket was scanned without issue. A friendly box office attendant directed her to Auditorium 1. Yet as soon as she stepped into the auditorium, an usher halted her. He wore a neat uniform, complete with a pinned name tag, Victor. His face held a forced politeness that shifted into something more dismissive as he spotted the hearing device behind Wanda's ear. "You're in the wrong place," he insisted. Wanda spoke softly. "No, I have the right ticket. Orchestra level, row C, seat 12. He glanced at it. "This seat is reserved. We have a private function here, ma'am." "But the box office told me to come to Auditorium 1, she said, holding up her ticket. The older woman hesitated, scanning for any misunderstanding. Victor frowned. "I'm sorry, this screening been changed, or maybe your ticket was reissued. We can't accommodate you here right now. You'll have to leave." Wanda, flustered, tried to explain. "But I don't understand. I paid weeks ago for this special showing." Her voice trembled, partially from feeling singled out and partially from the creeping dread that she might lose her chance to see the film. She pointed toward her hearing aid in a self-conscious gesture. "This theater is one of the few that offered the right accommodations, closed captioning devices for people like me." The usher folded his arms. "I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do." His tone, cold as marble, conveyed that he was not sorry in the least. Before Wanda could protest, he turned away. That was the moment that Chris Hemsworth happened to pass by, flanked by a small entourage of producers and publicists. He was tall, wearing casual jeans and a snug t-shirt, exuding an effortless charm. Cameras trailed in his wake, capturing him for behind-the-scenes footage. He glanced in Wanda's direction, seemed to sense the tension, and almost paused, but was swept forward by a wave of eager staff. The seeds of conflict were sown in those few seconds. Wanda was left to stand alone at the side of the auditorium, tears threatening to blur her vision. She considered leaving. She'd done nothing wrong, yet she felt so unwelcome. Was it a mix-up, a deliberate dismissal, or pure discrimination? Her thoughts churned, unsettled. Outside the tall entry doors, she noticed the wide, locked arms of security, the swirl of reporters, and the hush of watchers. Something bigger was brewing than she realized. And if she walked away now, would she regret it forever? She steeled herself, determined to stand up for her right to be there. What she couldn't imagine was how her protest would intersect with the powerful forces behind this major Hollywood production, and how one dismissive usher's action could trigger a chain of events that would expose hidden agendas, test loyalties, and reveal more about the human heart than any film reel ever could. Wanda took a seat in the far corner of the auditorium, at least for the moment. The film crew had begun setting up near the grand stage for Chris Hemsworth to film a short promotional spot. It was a tie-in event with a major studio that owned the rights to the classic musical playing later that evening. The plan was to capture Hemsworth introducing the screening, lauding the movie's timeless appeal, and perhaps surprising the audience if time allowed. In the hush, Wanda watched the showbiz flurry, feeling more like an intruder than a welcomed guest. A stiff hush parted around her. Although she wanted to approach the usher again, Wanda sensed hostility. She braced herself. Maybe she could reason with someone higher in the management chain. Standing, she inched toward the back row, discreetly avoiding the bright camera lights. She spotted a man in a pristine gray suit, looking both harried and important, flipping through a clipboard. "Excuse me, are you the manager?" she asked gently. He turned, offering a quick glance. "I am. My name is Everett Jacobs, the theater's general manager." His tone was courteous if rushed. "My name's Wanda Reynolds. I believe there's been a mix-up with my seat." She handed him her ticket. "The usher told me to leave, but I bought this weeks ago. I have a hearing aid, so I need the audio assistance offered here." Everett frowned. Where was he trying to send you? "Out. He said this auditorium is off-limits." Wanda lowered her gaze. "I don't want to cause trouble. But I do need the accommodations your theater promised." Glancing at the scribble of notes on the ticket, Everett shook his head. "This is the correct auditorium, though it's partially closed for the filming of a promotional piece. The screening is scheduled to happen after the shoot," he sighed. "Victor should not have turned you away." "Let me handle this. I'm so sorry." Relief surged through Wanda. "Thank you." Everett walked off, presumably to find Victor. She overheard murmurs from crew members, something about a looming deadline for the shoot, time constraints, and an impatient star manager who wanted no interruptions. She also caught the mention of a special licensing agreement with a foreign distributor. The event was timed to coincide with a major international release. Delays could be costly. Wanda didn't fully grasp the details, but she sensed tension in the air. This was more than just a promotional cameo. Money, image, and reputations were on the line. A side door opened, and Chris Hemsworth himself stepped in, politely excusing himself around staff as he navigated the cramped backstage hall. He flashed a quick, friendly smile to a camera operator. On screen, he was the embodiment of confidence. In person, he seemed grounded. Wanda felt a brief flutter of awe. She kept her distance, not wanting to be intrusive. Perhaps if the star recognized the confusion or saw her predicament, he might advocate on her behalf. But she doubted it. Celebrities had their own pressures, especially on a shoot. She settled into a seat at the side, ignoring Victor's scowl from across the aisle. The manager had vanished, presumably to sort out the logistics. Meanwhile, the filming continued. Lights flared, capturing Chris Hemsworth as he gave an enthusiastic monologue about the golden age of musicals, praising the film. Timeless charm, urging the audience to relish the chance to see it on a massive screen. He hit his marks with the precision of an experienced actor. Applause rose from a small group of stand-ins. From her vantage, Wanda couldn't help but wonder if this entire showy production overshadowed the importance of audience members like her. After a half-hour of repeated takes, the crew paused for a break. Hemsworth strolled off camera, shaking hands and trading polite banter with the director. Wanda glanced around, searching for Everett. She wanted to confirm if she could remain for the screening. As she stood, an agitated voice sliced through the quiet. "I told you this section is closed," hissed Victor, gripping Wanda's shoulder more forcefully than necessary. "Ma'am, you need to exit now." She winced. "I spoke to your manager. He said I could stay. I promise I'm not interfering." Victor's nostrils flared. "You're interfering with the set. Don't you realize who's filming here? We can't risk having random civilians wandering around." "Especially not," he hesitated, but the venom in his tone implied something Wanda couldn't ignore. She braced herself for a discriminatory remark. But before Victor could finish, Everett materialized. "Victor, can I speak with you privately?" The usher released Wanda's shoulder reluctantly. Everett led him to a corner. Their hushed conversation soon escalated. Wanda could make out only fragments. "She has a right. We have instructions. Don't want trouble. Studio demands." And then it was over, with Victor muttering an apology but offering Wanda no direct eye contact. Everett returned, expression tight. "Everything's sorted. Victor will allow you to stay," he exhaled. "Truly, I'm sorry. This evening is more complicated than usual." Wanda offered a small smile. "Thank you for your help." She settled back into her seat, heart pounding. She feared that any moment, another confrontation might erupt. Yet for now, it seemed she could watch from the sidelines. The promotional filming resumed, lights dancing across the auditorium's vaulted ceiling. More lines, more setups, more instructions crackled through the crew's headsets. The camera occasionally panned across the seats, capturing the vintage charm of the place. Still, Wanda couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was simmering. Why had Victor been so determined to remove her? Was it truly just a seat mix-up, or was there an undercurrent of hostility toward people with disabilities? Or perhaps there was a deeper concern about secrets slipping out, about something this filming might be hiding. She looked around at the staff, noticing more tension than usual. On the surface, they were just filming a promo piece. But beneath the bright lights, an undercurrent of secrecy gnawed at the edges of the production. As the official filming break approached, Wanda decided to slip out to the lobby for water. A few other patrons had arrived for the screening, but they were told to wait in a separate lounge until the filming finished. The hush of the corridor felt suffocating. She noticed a placard that read, "No unauthorized access, production in progress." It was roped off near the staircase leading up to the theater's balcony. Curiously, she saw Victor stationed there, as if guarding it. He shot her a cold glare. "Stay in the main lobby area," he said curtly. Wanda tensed, giving him a polite nod but avoiding conversation. There was something about his posture, a mix of anxiety and aggression, that gave her pause. Ignoring him, she made her way to the concession stand. Only one staff member, a teenage girl in a wrinkled uniform, was on duty. Wanda asked for a bottled water, offered a timid smile, and then scanned the posters on the wall while sipping. A hushed whisper from behind startled her. "Psst, hey, are you the lady who had trouble with the usher?" Turning, Wanda saw a man in casual attire, clutching a press badge. "I'm Mark Wheeler with the LA Insider. I saw what happened." Wanda blinked, uncertain how to respond. "Oh, it's all a bit silly, but yes, he tried to send me out." The manager intervened. Mark shook his head, empathy showing in his features. "It's not silly. People with disabilities get overlooked or pushed aside more often than we think. And that usher, he's been on edge since I got here." The journalist cast a glance around, ensuring no eavesdroppers. "Is it okay if I ask you some questions? I'm covering the behind the scenes of Chris Hemsworth's shoot, but I'm noticing some oddities." She lowered her voice. "Oddities?" Mark nodded. "The staff is extremely jumpy. Security's tight, not just for star protection. I think the theater's management has a separate agenda. I've overheard them talking about licensing negotiations and hush-hush deals with a major distributor. They don't want negative press overshadowing the event. Any disruption or mention of accommodations not provided could be a problem. Combine that with the hush money rumors, and I sense a bigger story. Hush money. I heard a snippet of conversation between production staff. Something about paying off certain employees to keep quiet about substandard conditions or a scandal involving the film's original owners. I'm not entirely sure, but that's not typical for a mere promotional shoot, so I started digging. The manager, Everett, is new here, right? Wanda shrugged. I wouldn't know, I don't come often. Mark frowned. He took over recently. I found references to sudden new policies that restrict attendance for certain groups. People with special needs have complained about seat reassignments or forced relocations. You might be the latest example. Wanda felt her cheeks grow warm. That's awful. It's humiliating to be told you don't belong somewhere just because you need a hearing device. Her thoughts churned. She had come only to see a beloved classic film. Now she found herself entangled in some swirling web of secrecy. Mark gave her a sympathetic nod. I'm looking for tangible proof. If you're willing to talk about your experience, it might help. But no pressure. I know this is a lot to take in. She sighed, her gaze drifting to the corridor where Victor stood guard. I'll think about it, Suddenly, the theater manager, Everett, appeared at the lobby entrance. Mark and Wanda instinctively fell silent. Excuse me, folks, Everett said, with forced politeness, but the filming's wrapping up soon. We're asking everyone to remain in the auditorium. The screening will begin shortly after. We apologize for any inconvenience. Mark forced a tight grin. Of course, Mr. Jacobs. Will we get a chance to interview Mr. Hemsworth later? Possibly, Everett said, though the clipped tone suggested that was unlikely. I appreciate your cooperation. He gestured for them to return to the auditorium. Wanda joined the small crowd streaming back. Mark lingered a moment, casting her a knowing look. As Wanda took her seat again, she noticed the production crew packing equipment at a faster pace. The excitement level had dropped, replaced by a hush that felt loaded with tension. A stagehand whispered that Chris Hemsworth would stay a bit longer to greet fans, but his team was pressuring him to leave due to time constraints. The swirl of half-lost conversation only magnified Wanda's curiosity. Why was everyone so on edge? Before long, the cameras were finally stowed, and overhead lights dimmed. Chris Hemsworth stepped forward on stage for a last wave at the small group of spectators who had trickled in for the screening. Despite the tension, he radiated warm energy, thanking everyone for allowing him to share the moment. Applause rippled through the seats. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, the hush was shattered by a terse announcement crackling through the theater's speaker system. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats. We apologize for the delay, but the screening will begin shortly. We kindly ask you to follow staff instructions for safety. All eyes flickered around in confusion. Wanda's heart pounded. This was not the usual pre-movie welcome. Rather, it felt more like an emergency directive. Was something wrong? She caught a glimpse of Victor in the aisles, scanning the rows. The usher looked even more agitated now, as though searching for trouble. Chris Hemsworth, standing near the front, glanced toward the manager, Everett. A silent exchange passed between them. The star seemed perplexed, possibly concerned. He gave a small, reassuring wave to the scattered audience, as if to calm them, then stepped off stage. That was the last Wanda saw of him for the moment. In the darkened hush, she felt her phone vibrate. A text message from an unknown number flickered on screen. If you want the real story, meet me by the east exit during the screening. Wanda guessed it was Mark, the journalist. She worried about stepping away again, especially with Victor prowling. But her curiosity, and maybe a sense of duty, burned hotter by the minute. She tried to focus on the silver screen as the vintage film began. The iconic overture soared through the speakers, accompanied by subtitles for the hearing-impaired. Wanda's heart fluttered with nostalgic delight, tempered only by the swirling tension that refused to vanish. Through the corner of her eye, She noticed a pair of silhouettes near the back row whispering in heated tones. The flicker of screen light revealed them, Everett the manager and Victor the usher. Their shadows stretched ominously against the walls. Something was definitely off. At last, she decided to slip out. As quietly as possible, Wanda rose and moved up the aisle. Victor was busy glaring at another patron who had dared to use a phone during the opening scene. Seizing her chance, she ducked through the door to the corridor and made her way toward the east exit, guided only by faint red exit lights. She found Mark waiting, leaning against the wall. He looked around anxiously, then nodded for her to follow him into a side corridor that led to a locked door. "This is a staff-only area," he whispered, tapping a small access panel. "But I noticed the code earlier while they were typing. The manager was rushing, so I got a quick glimpse. I need to show you something." Wanda's pulse quickened. "Show me what?" "A stash of boxes. I saw them being moved in earlier. They're labeled with foreign addresses with instructions that mention hush money." He exhaled. "I suspect it's bribe documentation, or something to do with covering up lost revenue from the film's original owners. My hunch, the reason they're shutting out certain patrons is to limit attention from consumer advocates and the press. They're worried that if the place is full of everyday folks, especially those in protected categories, someone might sniff out the corruption." She stared at him. Why in the world would they store shady documents in a movie theater basement? Mark shrugged. Maybe they think it's inconspicuous, hidden among old film reels. Or maybe they're using the cover of a big Hollywood event to move them without suspicion. "I don't have all the answers, but I know something crook's going on." Despite the swirling dread in her gut, Wanda found herself strangely resolute. "I'll help you, if it means uncovering the truth. I don't appreciate being dismissed or discriminated against." Mark nodded. "Let's hurry." He quickly tapped in a sequence on the small keypad. To Wanda's surprise, the door buzzed open. They slipped inside, descending a narrow staircase that smelled of stale popcorn and mildew. Flickering bulbs cast a weak light on cinderblock walls. At the bottom, the corridor opened onto a cramped storage room. Rows of shelves bulged with old film canisters, dusty projectors, and battered stage props. In a far corner, half hidden under a tarpaulin, were several large cardboard boxes. "There they are," Mark whispered, carefully lifting the tarp. "Look." Wanda drew closer. The boxes were stamped with shipping labels from overseas. Some bore stenciled addresses in Eastern Europe. Others had plain, unlabeled surfaces, with only cryptic black markers referencing licensing agreements private. A jolt of anxiety coursed through her. Were they about to cross a line they couldn't uncross? "I need photos," Mark said, rummaging in his pocket for his phone. He snapped a few shots, cautious not to disturb the contents too much. But curiosity pulled him further. He peeled back the flap of one box. Inside were binders stuffed with contracts, thick wads of paper sealed in plastic, and a manila folder labeled Olympia Theater, Silent Partners. Wanda's throat felt dry. This was clearly the property of the theater or some affiliated entity. If the documents revealed foul play, they were standing in the eye of a storm. For a moment, she second-guessed her involvement. She was just an ordinary patron who came for an evening's entertainment. Now she was waist-deep in potential corporate corruption. "This is big," Mark murmured. "I see references to bribes, payoffs, hush clauses. I don't understand all the legalese, but it's shady." The theater might be funneling money through shell companies to secure exclusive screening rights. Possibly they're bypassing accessibility requirements or paying fines in private. No wonder the staff is so cagey. He stuffed the folder back in carefully. "I'll send these photos to my editor. We have to proceed carefully. If they realize we've found this, who knows what they'll do to keep it under wraps." A sudden noise from above made them freeze. Footsteps, the heavy scrape of a door, voices echoed through the corridor. One of them, unmistakably, was Victor's. Wanda's heart pounded so loudly she feared it would give them away. "She's not in the auditorium," hissed Victor's voice. "I saw her slip out. That reporter, too, I knew he was snooping." "I told you, it was risky to let him in with a press pass." Then Everett's cool voice responded. "Calm down, they're amateurs. They can't have gone far. I'll check the basement. You go watch the lobby. If they've gotten into those boxes, this entire deal is in jeopardy." A pause. "And you know what that means for both of us." Wanda and Mark exchanged panicked looks. They had to hide or escape. The basement corridor had only one exit that they knew of, the door they'd come through. And now it seemed Everett was coming down. Mark frantically pointed to a shadowy alcove behind a stack of old set pieces. They crouched low behind a battered wooden boat prop from some bygone stage production. Wanda tried to control her breathing. If they were caught, would Everett call security, the police, or would he handle matters more quietly? Within seconds, heavy footfalls resonated on the stairs. Light from a flashlight beam swept across the walls, paused on the boxes. Wanda's pulse skyrocketed. She tightened her grip on Mark's arm, her mind racing with thoughts of what might happen if they were discovered. Could they outrun Everett? Probably not. Could they reason with him? Doubtful. The beam of light moved away, followed by Everett's low muttering. "Not here. Maybe they got spooked." "If they have photos," he let the sentence trail off ominously. "Victor, they're gone," he called softly up the staircase. "I'm coming back." The footsteps receded, leaving the basement in muffled silence once more. Mark exhaled. Wanda's nerves thrummed. "We have to get out," he whispered, "but we can't go the way we came." Wanda glanced around, noticing a narrow utility hallway at the far end of the basement. She pointed. "Maybe that leads outside." They decided to try. Creeping past the boxes, they squeezed through a battered metal door that squeaked in protest. On the other side was a labyrinth of old piping and maintenance closets. Faint, flickering lights lit their path. At last, they reached a small flight of stairs that ended in another coded door. Mark attempted the same code from before, but it buzzed red. A wave of panic surged. "They must have changed it," he whispered, looking over his shoulder. "What do we do?" Wanda scanned the area. She spotted a fuse box near the door. In an act of desperation, she flipped open its panel. Several labeled switches glowed faintly. She swallowed hard. If we kill the power, it might unlock this door or at least cause a distraction. Mark hesitated, but they were cornered. He nodded. Wanda pulled one of the main switches. Instantly, the corridor was plunged into darkness. A distant alarm began to wail faintly from upstairs. The door's keypad flickered, then died. Mark pushed the handle, and it gave way. The door swung open onto a gravel patch beside the theater's side lot. They bolted outside into the crisp night air. Behind them, overhead lights across the theater's grand facade blinked. The alarm's muffled shrieks spilled onto the street. Patrons milling around outside looked baffled. Some shouted about a possible evacuation. Wanda and Mark exchanged a quick glance, hearts pounding, hair disheveled, clothes dusty from the basement. Though free of immediate danger, they knew their discovery was no small matter. The entire event might shut down if the alarm was seen as a major threat. Chris Hemsworth was possibly still inside with the production crew. The manager and Usher had everything to lose if their secret documents were exposed. "Now what?" Wanda asked, voice trembling. Mark sucked in a breath. "We get these photos out, but we also need to help any patrons still inside who might be in trouble, especially if the staff tries something drastic to cover this up. This is bigger than just one story about an usher discriminating against you. It's about corruption that could affect many others. The management is clearly playing dirty." Wanda's eyes hardened with resolve. "Let's find a safe way back in. People are inside. They might not understand what's going on." A fleeting image of Chris Hemsworth flashed in her mind. She wondered if he was aware of any of this. Probably not. But perhaps if he found out, his star power could tip the balance. "We can't abandon them." "All right, but we move carefully," Mark said. "And keep your phone ready." Around the corner, they found a side entrance used by staff for loading. It was propped open, presumably by employees scrambling to assess the sudden power failure. They slipped in, hearing confused voices echo along the corridor. The alarm had died, replaced by the crackle of emergency lighting. As they emerged into the main lobby, they saw the silhouette of a tall figure that made them both freeze. Chris Hemsworth stood near the concession stand, talking hurriedly into a phone, his brow furrowed. A security guard stood with him, apparently giving updates. When the security guard left, Hemsworth noticed Wanda and Mark creeping in. For an instant, the star's expression was unreadable. Then he recognized Wanda from earlier. "Are you okay?" he asked, stepping forward, concern coloring his tone. "The power outage has everyone spooked." They said there might be an electrical issue, or maybe the alarm was triggered accidentally. "I'm trying to see if we need to evacuate." Wanda swallowed. "It wasn't an accident," she said quietly. The actor's gaze sharpened. "What do you mean?" Mark cleared his throat. "We found evidence of wrongdoing, contracts, hush money, discriminatory policies, hidden in the basement. The manager, Everett, and that usher, Victor, are deeply involved. When they realized we'd discovered their secret, they tried to corner us. We had no choice but to kill the power to escape. I'm sure they're trying to spin it into a technical malfunction." Chris Hemsworth looked momentarily stunned. Then, with surprising decisiveness, he nodded. "Okay, we need to expose this. But first, we have to make sure everyone's safe. There are still people in the auditorium, right?" Wanda nodded. "Yes, the screening was running. Some folks might have left once the lights flickered, but I'm sure a few remain. They might not realize the danger." Chris glanced around, scanning for the manager. "I'll call the authorities." He pulled out his phone again. "You two, just stay close. Don't let them corner you again." Before they could respond, another voice boomed across the lobby. "Hemsworth, there you are." Everett emerged from the shadows, accompanied by Victor and 2 security guards. His face wore a strained smile. "No need to worry. We've handled the technical glitch. The screening can continue. We're doing a final check." Chris arched an eyebrow. "A glitch? Are you sure it wasn't sabotage? Ms. Reynolds and her friend here just told me quite a different story." Everett's face paled, but he forced a laugh. "I'm not sure what they said, but they're confused. This is likely a misunderstanding. Might I suggest we step into my office to discuss this calmly?" Wanda exchanged a look with Mark, alarmed. Stepping into Everett's office sounded like walking into a trap. Chris must have sensed it too. He stiffened. "I think we'd rather talk in the open, where the rest of your staff can hear as well." Victor's gaze flicked to Wanda, pure hatred burning in his eyes. He looked ready to snap. One of the security guards stepped forward, as if preparing to forcibly lead them away. Mark tensed, gripping his phone. But Chris Hemsworth, with a star's commanding presence, raised a hand. "Unless you want me publicly declaring there's a dangerous situation here, which would bring the police and media in droves, you'll let us talk this out safely in front of everyone. After all," he added, voice like steel, "it would be a real shame if word got out that management is making under-the-table deals that endanger patrons. Don't you think?" Everett's fake smile wavered. "Of course, let's go into the auditorium, that might be best." He gestured stiffly. "Security, please help gather everyone in the main hall so we can clarify the confusion." Wanda's heart hammered. This felt like the calm before a storm. Everett was clearly hoping to control the narrative. But if Chris Hemsworth was going to stand with them, maybe they had a chance to reveal the truth publicly and make sure no one got hurt in the process. She followed the group, step by cautious step, bracing for the confrontation that she knew was coming. Inside the auditorium, a scattered handful of patrons milled in confusion under the dimmed house lights. The classic musical was paused mid-scene on the screen, frozen in a bright swirl of color. Ushers ushered the last few stragglers forward, guiding them near the stage area. Among them was an older couple, a mother with a restless teen, and a few solo attendees who seemed uncertain whether to leave or remain. Chris Hemsworth strode to the center aisle. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention?" His voice, used to commanding presence in big-budget movies, carried easily through the large space. "We've had a technical issue, but more importantly, there's a situation involving the management that we need to address." A ripple of startled murmurs. Everett hovered behind him, attempting to look authoritative but failing as he dabbed sweat from his brow. Victor lurked near the side, hands clenched, scanning the group as if searching for the moment to pounce. Security guards stood in pairs, uncertain whom to obey. Wanda and Mark positioned themselves by Chris's side. The old couple in the front row stared at Wanda with surprise. They might have recognized her from earlier. The mother and teen paused, curious. It was an odd tableau, a smattering of ordinary people in a grand, half-lit theater, a Hollywood A-lister taking charge, and the manager trying desperately to salvage control. With a steady composure, Chris turned to Everett. "You wanted to clarify something. Let's hear it." Everett cleared his throat, clinging to the veneer of civility. "Of course, we had a small security issue. My usher, Victor, thought Ms. Reynolds was intruding in a restricted area. There was a misunderstanding. It's unfortunate. We certainly do not discriminate against patrons with disabilities." He forced a smile at Wanda, who returned a disbelieving stare. "We have the utmost respect for all our guests." Wanda stepped forward, voice trembling but resolute. "That's not what happened. You singled me out because I wear a hearing aid. Then your staff tried to kick me out, despite my valid ticket, and that was only the beginning." Everett waved a hand dismissively. "That's quite an accusation. We simply had to maintain order for the filming of Mr. Hemsworth's promotional spot. We regret any inconvenience, but—" Mark cut in. "We found boxes in the basement, labeled with hush money agreements and bribes. You're running some kind of shady operation, aren't you?" Gasps and whispers flooded the auditorium. The manager's face went from pale to furious. That's nonsense," he snapped, though the tremor in his voice betrayed fear. "No one should have been in that private storage area." Hemsworth frowned. "Private or not, if there's evidence of wrongdoing, you owe everyone an explanation." Victor finally burst in. "You're overreacting. That area is restricted for a reason. You have no right to poke around. We should call the police on you for trespassing." He pointed a shaking finger at Wanda and Mark. "You're trying to sabotage a successful business for your own gain." Wanda's indignation flared. "We did what we had to do because you cornered us, and we have photos." Mark held up his phone, ignoring the security guard's glare. "Shall I show everyone here the pictures of your hush money documents?" We also heard talk of bribes to keep the place from being inspected, especially regarding accessibility compliance. Care to comment? Pandemonium broke out among the small crowd. People started shouting questions. Chris Hemsworth surveyed the chaos, then raised his hand again. The hush gradually returned. "Everyone, please," Chris said, turning to Everett. "Why don't you let them show those photos? If they're fabricated, you have nothing to fear, right?" Everett's lips thinned, but he couldn't risk appearing more suspicious by refusing. He nodded stiffly. Mark opened a few of the images, brightening his phone's screen so a cluster of onlookers could see. The photos clearly displayed shipping labels, lines of legal text referencing penalty payouts for ADA claims, and references to undisclosed payments to overseas accounts. Gasps rippled through the small audience. "Those can't be real," one of the ushers murmured. Another staff member looked appalled. "They are real," Mark said, "and we have more. We also overheard Everett instructing Victor to remove any patrons who might raise issues about accommodations. That includes Ms. Reynolds, who needed the hearing device support. The reason? They want to keep their operation under the radar, fewer complaints, fewer eyes, fewer potential lawsuits." Everett's face twisted. "It's not you're twisting the facts. We were doing everything by the book." Suddenly, the double doors to the auditorium swung open. Flashlights and official voices boomed. "Los Angeles Police Department." Everybody remain calm. Two uniformed officers strode in. accompanied by the previously absent head of the theater's security detail. Chris Hemsworth turned, relief flickering in his expression. "Officers, thanks for coming. I asked a member of my team to call you." Everett and Victor exchanged horrified glances. In that moment, the managers carefully maintained composure shattered. "This is all a misunderstanding," he spluttered, stepping toward the officers. "These two," he pointed at Wanda and Mark, "broke into a restricted area, tampered with the power. They caused a false alarm." One officer glanced at Chris. "Sir, did you witness anything that supports that claim?" Chris shook his head slowly. "I saw them threatened, and I've seen evidence that there's something very wrong with the management here." Mark stepped forward, phone in hand. "Officers, I'm a journalist. Here's the photographic evidence of the documents we found, plus a recording of our conversation with the manager and Usher threatening Ms. Reynolds." He tapped the screen to play an audio file. Everett's voice, low and menacing, repeated phrases like, "We can't have them sniffing around," and "We'll remove them if necessary." Victor's voice chimed in with, "No one will believe them anyway." Shock widened the eyes of bystanders. Everett lunged for Mark's phone, but Chris Hemsworth stepped in, gently but firmly blocking him. "Let's keep this civil," the actor said, voice calm but commanding. "No one's burying any evidence tonight." Victor tried to rush forward, but one of the officers easily intercepted him, placing a hand on his chest. "All right, that's enough," said the other officer. "We'll sort this out at the station. We'll need statements from everyone." A wave of relieved murmurs washed over the patrons. The older couple pulled out their phones, capturing the scene on video. The mother and teen looked stunned. Wanda exhaled shakily, tears threatening to well up now that the tension was finally breaking. Everett, seeing no escape, tried a last desperate ploy. "This entire fiasco is going to cost you," he spat toward Mark and Wanda. "You'll hear from our attorneys. And you, Mr. Hemsworth," he added bitterly, "you might as well kiss your relationship with this theater goodbye." Chris Hemsworth gave him a measured look. "If that means severing ties with a venue that discriminates and engages in shady dealings, I'll gladly do it. My integrity isn't for sale." An officer gestured for Everett to place his hands behind his back. "Sir, you're under suspicion of fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to violate accessibility laws. We'll see how the charges line up once we review all the evidence." Victor stood rigid, fists clenched, but offered no resistance as he, too, was taken aside. In the swirl of police activity, the small group of patrons parted, giving the officers room to escort the suspects out. A subdued hush fell over the auditorium. Wanda realized she was trembling from the adrenaline, her mind swirling with relief and disbelief that this was all happening. Chris looked at Wanda, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded, though tears slipped down her cheeks. He offered a compassionate smile. "I'm really sorry you were treated that way. No one should have to fight that hard just to enjoy a film." Wanda wiped her tears. "Thank you for standing up for us. If you hadn't been here, I don't know if we'd have been believed." Mark joined them, exhaling heavily. "Still can't believe we made it through that." He gestured to his phone, the record of their discovery. "We should contact my editor tonight. This story is going to be huge." Some of the lingering staff came forward to apologize profusely, insisting they had no knowledge of management's illegal acts. A few tearful employees seemed genuinely stunned. Others offered to help any remaining patrons with refunds and rescreenings. It was a bittersweet moment. Justice was unfolding, but the beloved old theater's reputation was in tatters. Wanda felt a pang of sadness. She'd come here expecting an evening of classic musical joy, not to become the catalyst for a corruption scandal. Chris Hemsworth approached the microphone stand near the stage, addressing the scattered patrons with a gentle sincerity. "For those of you still here, I'm sorry tonight ended this way. The best I can do is invite you all to a private screening of this classic musical at another venue in the city. My team will cover the cost. As for the Olympia Theater, I hope it can reopen under better management someday." Applause, soft and uncertain at first, grew in warmth. Wanda found herself clapping, her heart lighter than it had been all evening. Justice had been served, at least in the immediate sense. She wondered about the deeper layers of the scandal, but for now, exposing Everett's wrongdoing was a victory. When the last echoes of applause died, the police led Everett and Victor out in handcuffs. Wanda saw a flicker of shame cross Victor's face as he passed. Her hearing aid caught his whispered words. All for some old lady. He was still defiant, refusing to see the harm he'd caused. But Wanda refused to let that bitterness dampen her relief. She'd found her voice, stood up for her right to be there, and that fight had revealed a tangled web of corruption that would have continued harming countless others. Even Mark, who'd arrived simply to cover a promotional shoot, had discovered a career-defining story. And Chris Hemsworth, the charismatic star, had shown that his moral compass was more than just a Hollywood PR facade. He'd helped champion the truth. The battered, once glorious Olympia Theater lay empty of illusions now. The question remained, would new leadership restore its legacy without corruption? And how many more layers of wrongdoing might unravel before the final credits rolled? Yet in that moment of clarity, Wanda understood that she and others had made a difference. Perhaps it was just one shining moment of justice in a complicated world, but it proved that, sometimes, the dismissed and unheard could be the ones to topple the mightiest walls of deceit. News outlets exploded the next morning with headlines. Beloved LA Theater in Corruption Scandal Manager, Usher Arrested. Mark's article led the charge, featuring quotes from Wanda, evidence photos, and Chris Hemsworth's statement of condemnation. Reactions poured in. Disability advocacy groups championed Wanda's courage in standing against discrimination. Filmmakers condemned the manager's bribery scheme and demanded clarity on the foreign licensing deals that had begun to unravel. Even local politicians weighed in, promising thorough investigations into the theater's practices. In the days that followed, the Olympia Theater remained closed. A large chain that specialized in historic venues expressed interest in taking over. Staff members, mostly oblivious to Everett's crimes, clamored to keep their jobs under new management. Lawyers for the theater's parent company scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. With Mark's article shining a spotlight on their shady underbelly, they had little room to operate in the shadows. Wanda, suddenly thrust into an unwelcome spotlight, received countless messages of support. For a quiet woman who had come only to see a classic film, it was overwhelming. She responded politely, praising Mark for his tenacity, Chris Hemsworth for his integrity, and urging that the real victory belonged to everyone who fought against injustice, particularly those, like herself, who often felt marginalized. One afternoon, she got a call from Chris's publicist, inviting her to a more private film event at a respected art house cinema downtown. He wanted to properly host that promised screening, free of the taint left by the Olympia fiasco. Wanda's heart warmed at the gesture. She accepted, uncertain what the evening would bring but hopeful that it might offer a positive note. At that event, she was greeted by friendly staff who provided top-notch accessibility accommodations. Mark was there, dressed more casually this time, brimming with excitement about the continuing developments of his story. Chris Hemsworth arrived without fanfare, smiling warmly when he saw Wanda, and politely reminding her that this night was about celebrating film, unburdened by secrecy and discrimination. They settled in to watch that beloved musical, the same one that had started all the chaos. This time, the subtitles were crisp, the auditorium comfortable, and the air filled with a sense of shared camaraderie. As the opening credits rolled, Wanda felt tears of joy dampen her cheeks, no longer tears of stress or fear, but of gratitude and triumph. When the film ended, the small crowd drifted into the lobby, where Chris, Wanda, and Mark engaged in soft conversations about the power of stories to reveal truths and bring people together. Chris offered Wanda a gentle hug and told her that her courage was an inspiration. Mark teased her that she might become a co-author on his next exposé, which made her laugh shyly. She still found it surreal to have her name attached to headlines, but it felt meaningful, too. As the night grew late, Wanda took a final glance at the flickering marquee of this new theater, the promise of better days shining in the neon glow. The entire experience had tested her resilience and sense of self, but it had also shown her the power of collective action, people from different walks of life uniting to confront wrongdoing. She realized something crucial. Even if the system seemed rigged or intimidating, an ordinary individual's stand for dignity could spark a chain reaction. And when others joined in, journalists, honest employees, conscientious celebrities, no house of cards built on lies could remain standing for long. A quiet peace settled over her. She had found her seat, not only in a theater but in a moment of truth. And she had refused to be dismissed. Time passed, and investigations into Everett's operation widened. He and Victor, along with a few complicit executives, faced charges for fraud, money laundering, and willful violations of disability laws. Some employees who cooperated with authorities were given leniency. Others faced job losses. The press coverage spurred city officials to revisit regulations on theaters, ensuring that accommodations for patrons with disabilities were not only implemented, but enforced. Word spread that the Olympia Theater would reopen under new management after extensive remodeling. Wanda received a personal invite from the new owners, thanking her for inadvertently spearheading the cleanup. While she felt no malice for the building itself, indeed, she cherished the memories of the grand architecture. She knew she could only return when it truly stood for inclusion and respect. Mark's career skyrocketed. Several top publications clamored for his next investigation, but he kept in touch with Wanda, often sending her updates about the trial or offering glimpses into behind-the-scenes wrangling with lawyers. He promised that if any new twist arose, she'd be the first to know. She appreciated his thoroughness, though she was content to let her role in the story fade so she could resume her quieter life. And Chris Hemsworth. He continued filming his blockbuster, fulfilling promotional obligations, but quietly parted ways with the old Olympia arrangement. He used his platform to advocate for better accessibility standards in public entertainment venues. Occasionally, an interviewer would ask about that scandal, and Chris would say, "I learned that even small acts of standing up for what's right can mean the world to someone who's been silenced." We should all keep our eyes open and step in when we see injustice. A few months later, Wanda found herself strolling through a local film festival. She still loved cinema, how it transported her to magical worlds. In the festival's program, an article by Mark Wheeler caught her eye. The Power of Patron Voices in Hollywood. He'd included her story as a shining example of everyday heroism. Wanda felt a gentle surge of pride. She remembered the frightened moment when Victor had tried to force her out, how alone she'd felt. Yet that single moment of refusal had sparked a fight for justice. Leaving the festival, she paused to admire an old theater marquee. It reminded her of the grandeur and potential buried in those venerable halls. She thought about the next generation of patrons, people with hearing aids, wheelchairs, visual aids, who might one day enter a cinema without fear of being dismissed or discriminated against. Perhaps that was the lasting victory. As dusk settled, she smiled up at the marquee's glow, imagining the swirling possibilities of stories yet to come, on screens, in newspapers, and in the lives of ordinary folks who refused to be silenced by intimidation or corruption. Wanda carried that hopeful vision into the night, content knowing that in her own quiet way, she had indeed helped rewrite the script for how theaters should treat every audience member, with dignity, respect, and an open door to the magic of cinema. If you enjoyed this story and want to read more tales of courage, unexpected heroes, and the truth finally prevailing, consider subscribing for future updates and stories. After all, sometimes the most inspiring narratives unfold when ordinary people refuse to accept an unjust no. Subscribe today and stay connected to the stories that show how one small stand can create a ripple of meaningful change.